Good evening, my name is Tony Jones, and you are tuned in to The Coalition, where we discuss all sides of local, regional, and national news, politics, and current events online at coalitionradio.us. Now, newly minted on the iTunes. You can get The Coalition now on iTunes. Just go on your iTunes device, go to podcast, type in The Coalition, and our luxurious logo, which we don't have, but we will pop up, I promise you. And, as you go into your holiday season, if you're going to be traveling hours and hours on the road, what better, PO taxpayer, than to grab a bunch of Coalition podcasts to bring you through your trip, right? You're a traveling man.
I am a traveling man, and the first question that comes to mind, how did we get past the censors?
It was just some kid who wanted to go home for the holiday. Oh, accept. All right. It is surreal going to iTunes and seeing, NPR, Jimmy Kimmel Live, The Coalition, Paul Harvey. It's like, what just happened?
Okay.
And that's the rest of the story. No, it's and it gives us a legitimacy that we absolutely do not deserve. So please, we're begging you, please download something, because they may realize their mistake if they don't see any activity in the next week or so.
And we'll try to live up to the honor.
There you go.
And once again, we are going live on Spreaker, so if you have a Spreaker app for your phone, if you're on the road, you're in your car, you can't get the over-the-air signal, you can catch us live on Spreaker each and every week. So we are all over the place.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, Tony, I think it's time for our favorite segment of the week.
Hate mail?
Hate mail. We've got hate mail. We've gone a week or so. Our programming board, our board of directors, our standards committee had gotten together and wanted to see what was going on. Had we all of a sudden developed a warm and fuzzy? But again, the straw that stirs the drink. Our own friend out there in Facebook land, Kenneth Block, hath done it again. Managing to find new people to loathe me on a personal level, heretofore thought impossible. So Mr. Block, in his own witty way, posted a little ditty about the fine folks at RERA, I guess, who were having a Christmas party and who recently dropped the price from $40 to $35.
Slashed the price.
Slashed the price.
Wait, 40 to 35?
Well, 40 to 35.
It's not really a slashing, but,
Well, I mean, it is a step down. And according to Mr. Block, economics would suggest that they are doing this because of falling demand. Now,
I think it's their Black Friday sale.
The Black Friday sale? Okay.
They have people pushing against the doors now that it's $35.
Well, okay. And free raffle tickets?
Yes.
To our Scud missile raffle? Mm-hmm. Okay. I pointed out in my own witty repartee that this was nothing more than a level of price elasticity that had been assigned to RERA functions, that the market has spoken, and that the marginal propensity to buy RERA tickets was actually falling in direct relation to the perception of the Republican status in this state. I thought that was reasonable. Well, again, I'm hurt. Mr. Nicholas Kutis wrote, and I quote, in reference to me, "He's a useful idiot, as the Soviets used to say. His agitprop prop works fine for intended purposes, but if there isn't much internal dialogue to him, he's worth about as little as he says. The fact that Tony Jones or any other Rhode Islander would make an anonymous Facebook profile says something about the person's character. The he-she..."
Is there something you're not telling us? Are you, in fact, a he-she?
Can't express all of its opinions by its own name because of the cowardice that anonymity reward suggests that PO taxpayer input into the conversation ought to be discounted rightly by the amount of satisfaction it gets out of posting opinions it is afraid, I say, to post under its own name.
So in that very segment, P.O., we just talked at the same time, which means that this is not a ventriloquist actor. Hold on, I'm going to drink a glass of water as I speak.
And we were not, in fact, separated at birth. So,
actually, I'm Nicholas Kutis.
So, to Nicholas Kutis, if you're out there, we're the Care Bears of talk radio. Can we all say it together? We care. We care. All right.
I'm impressed that he thinks a woman could actually do your voice.
Yeah, that's scary.
It's like Patty and Selma times 3 or something.
Well, Folks, keep it coming. Tony, you've got a couple of links if they want to post questions and or additional diatribes of a personal nature.
Of course, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On Twitter, Coalition_radio, and of course, CoalitionRadio.us. And
please post them actually on Facebook because P.O. enjoys them so much.
And the important thing is that pretty much anybody in Rhode Island knows where to find me. So if you just want to tell me in person, I'd be happy to relay the message.
Billboards work effectively, too, as well as a variety of downtown nefarious dining spots. Well, we're also pleased today to re-welcome back into the fold Russ Moore. Russ, who formerly wrote for the Warwick Beacon, Man About Town, Man in Sport of Kings, currently writes for Go Local Prov. He has had a couple of ditties in Go Local lately that have attracted some attention himself from the progressive community. Russ, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about the article that ginned this up, and then we'll give you a couple of responses from the progressive community, and let's take it from there.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving. And what brought this along is I wrote a column in which I basically argued that there are many different types and forms of public service. You don't have to work for the government or a nonprofit to be doing public service. You can't tell me the gentleman who opens up a restaurant and employs 20, 25 people, as many as 40 people, who, earn wages, go out, spend that money in the community, pay taxes. You can't tell me that's not a public service. Whereas if he had simply gone on and, got a job at the DPW or in the fire department, that would have been public service, but this wouldn't. They're both public service. Of course, we need a government to fix the roads, protect us, put out fires, educate the kids. But we also need a strong, healthy private sector. And without businessmen like this gentleman, Sam Corey, who owns 2 restaurants, Top of the Bay down in Warwick, as long as also Sam's Inn on West Shore Road in Warwick. Without people like him taking risks, putting their livelihood, their money on the line, making things happen, our whole system's going to fall apart. And I think that's the problem we have in Rhode Island.
Opening up something in Oakland Beach is definitely public service, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk for a second about the whole notion of risk capital. As dry as that sounds, that's really the engine that drives the whole economy, and as a result funds government, isn't it? Ultimately, someone willing to invest in an idea is what generates economic activity, correct?
Absolutely. And without that economic activity, we're going to have no money to fund the government. The public sector, as great as it is, it does not create wealth. The private sector creates wealth, and the public sector takes that wealth and uses it to do, admittedly, important things. And without people like, Mr. Corey, who are willing to take a risk, start a business, employ people, pay taxes, our system's going to fall apart. And that's one of the problems we have in Rhode Island. We don't have enough taxpayers.
Well, I would agree with that, but I'm not sure I would go to the extent that you wouldn't say that that's a public service. People open businesses because they want to open a business. And I think that in itself is enough reason, and I'm glad they do it.
Sure. So you think it's all about motivation, in other words, because...
Yeah. There's a certain type of personality that wants to open a business, that enjoys taking risks in exchange for the potential for a much greater financial reward than just investing their money passively.
But the 40 people that work there...
I think it's great that
are making the money thanks to that risk. It's a service to the public in a way.
It's not really a service to the public. It's a service to his own business, and that's a good enough reason in and of itself.
But you say a select group of people are like that. Ultimately, aren't we all motivated by some level... and I hate the word greed, but some level of desire for financial gain?
Self-interest. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Self-interest.
I think everyone is motivated by desire for financial gain to some extent, but I think there are people who look at a situation and say, they're driving through Oakland Beach and they say, you know what, I think a restaurant would do well here. I've got ideas about what price point will bring people in to spend money. I'm not going to price it too high because that's not what the community can take. There are people here who would do well working in restaurant jobs. They wouldn't have a long commute. This is a good place for me to open a business. It's enlightened self-interest.
Absolutely.
It also happens to...
I think you make an excellent point, but I would also argue that some of the people that take jobs working for the public sector also do it out of, as you call it, enlightened self-interest. Yeah. They say, I've got the job security, I've got the great benefits, I've got the pension coming. Yeah. Well, I guess you could argue that a lot of people that work for the government really aren't doing it out of a motivation for public service. I've had people tell me who work for the government, they say, well, you should work for the government so that you could be guaranteed a pension when we were talking about pension reform.
I don't believe every individual employee of the government is doing it because they want to self-sacrifice and serve the government. They're getting a paycheck, and that's perfectly fine. If they're doing their job well, they deserve that paycheck.
Absolutely.
If they're not doing their job well, and they're being protected in that job, that's a different story.
Sure. There are a large amount of people there that are there for what I like to call glorified welfare.
Yeah. and the government ideally should be examining from time to time their payroll, not the dollars and cents of it, but who are the people working for us in terms of their job functions, how many of these functions are redundant, what can we be combining into single jobs. It should be the government's job, among other things, to be as efficient in its own operation as possible.
But if you look at Rhode Island right now, I think anyone who objectively, views our economy, everyone would argue or would agree that we have plenty of government. We have a lot of good nonprofits. What we don't have is enough private sector activity. We don't have enough private sector.
We do need more private
So we need
sector
guys like Sam Corey to start businesses. And that's kind of why I make admittedly elite to say that that's kind of, in a way, public service.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that public service, and I also wouldn't call individual people applying for jobs with the government necessarily public service, although we use the word public servant.
Right.
But
what we mean by that is we're paying their salary. We don't mean that these people are self-sacrificing.
But if you come from the progressive side of the aisle, much is made of the notion that they ennoble highly paid, highly compensated government work as a form of public service. Witness the Kennedy mistake. The Kennedys would have you believe that they are doing this because they are on the path of truth and righteousness, that somehow that they are extending themselves in a way that others don't, and there's a nobility and near heroism to this. And I would argue that, again, they are nothing more than highly paid civil servants who are performing what is at best at times a necessary function.
Is that necessarily a left thing only? I've heard people on the right basically say, I could be doing XYZ in the private sector, and implying that they're doing the people a favor by being in office.
Oh, no, and that's a very fair analogy. I see it overwhelmingly from the less. I see it more from what I call the cafeteria conservative right. I mean, John Robitaille, the last GOP nominee for governor,
the non-candidate,
who called himself a man of small business and small government. Let's not forget that the man took down a six-figure job working for the Don, Governor Carcieri.
$130,000 a year.
$130 large a year. And there's an appalling parade of radio and TV personalities who essentially sold out their track record, their legacy, to do that.
Steve Cass.
That's another one, who had the euphemistic emergency management job until one day he didn't. And then, oddly enough, the job description may have changed, the salary did not. So my contention, and I think I agree with Russ, is that if we're going to euphemistically describe this great mass of people as public servants, isn't the engine that fuels their very ability to exist performing really the noblest act of public service?
I would certainly agree with that.
Because ultimately, when you talk about risk capital, government in and of itself is not allowed to fail. The Sam Coreys of the world can find themselves on the wrong end of a trend, the wrong end of some type of historical, financial, exogenous event, and be in the, as well run as his business is, can find themselves staring failure in the eye pretty quickly.
Every day, he'll tell you.
One need only look back at what happened in the days after 9/11 to see the sheer amount of business failure in other parts of the country because of the sudden stoppage of the economic engine.
Absolutely. I mean, and I certainly agree with Christine. I don't think all these small businessmen wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to open up a small business because it's the right thing to do."
No,
absolutely not.
I want to create jobs.
Exactly, and I think that one of the things Rhode Island Future did to me, they mischaracterized my position when they made it look like that's what I was arguing. That's not what I was arguing. What I was arguing is that we need to do more for these people because we need more of them. And then they come back and they argue that, we passed 25 bills that are going to help the private sector. What are you talking about? Let me tell you something. Creating a new super bureaucrat who's going to call himself the king or whatever they're going to call it, the executive of commerce, secretary of commerce, is not helping small business. That's not what we're looking for here.
Well,
we need reforms that are going to help people succeed in small business by lowering taxes, lowering regulations, and being reasonable.
Because in that case, all they did was redefine the bureaucracy that already existed.
Of course.
It was essentially a glorified business card change.
They polished a turd.
And lipstick on the pig. Where have I heard that? Well, let me quote from him. And
What a beautiful mixed metaphor.
In terms of the rifuture.org people, we did have some fun with them this week, with Mr. Plain and his group, because we invited them to come on the air. Initially, they didn't respond to us. I think they may have been in the room, in the bunker, trying to figure out how to respond to a bunch of capitalists. And then ultimately, because of some logistical issues that came up, couldn't make it. They do have an open invitation to come here to debate the point.
I think we had a little bit of a misunderstanding. I think there was a territorial issue, but I do think on the going forward basis, we're going to get one of those guys in the room here. We're going to have a great debate at some point.
Yeah,
I'm optimistic.
A fireside chat.
Well, because ultimately, the coalition, as I pointed out to a few people today, has had more progressive, more Green Party, more liberal guests in here in the 3 months that we've been in business than other major venues have had in 3 years. And
the other venues give them a soundbite. We give them more or less the whole hour.
They can talk, in other words.
Right.
Exactly.
right, and we want them to open up the points for discussion, because ultimately, as we like to say, the libertarians and the Green Party people, we all kind of want to end up at the same place. It's just how we get there seems to be a little different. And there's fertile area for friendly, chop-busting debate. We can have some fun, a few laughs, and argue our points like heck. Well,
It's all collegial. It's not a mean-spirited thing here. We're looking to have a good time.
Because I think the one thing we all agree is that we all loathe the party elites in this state. We all loathe the Democrats. We all certainly loathe the Republicans. All right, one need only listen to the show on a weekly basis to
Come
understand
on, we
that.
don't hate anybody. We just disagree.
No, it's
more machine.
We're gonna have to part company on that one.
Yeah,
I don't hate anyone.
I wouldn't say I hate anyone either. It's I'm not real happy about the whole machine party problems that we have in this state.
We disagree on issues. That's the way I look at it. On certain issues.
I'll dial back from the hate. I'll just simply say I loathe them.
Well, you're not going to get any mail this week if you do that.
Well, no, because
I think we're still going to get mail.
No, wait till I read
No,
this.
PO will be rabble-rousing all over the internet, just for the heck of it.
Well, Mr. Howard, who wrote a fairly interesting piece on the rifuture.org website, which is a worthwhile read, folks. Even if you consider yourself a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, a libertarian, you have to read other sites. You have to
So true.
You have to ingest and internalize other people's opinions, because we do find kernels of wisdom throughout that. But let me read this one piece, and I'd like your reactions. Paying taxes is not a public service. Paying taxes is a part of a citizen's social contract with the government, so the government can provide genuine public services so that someone's private service can function. Yikes. What say you, Russ?
Where did I sign a social contract saying that I was going to pay taxes?
Do you drive on the roads?
Absolutely.
Then you are part of the social contract. The roads get paved by somebody other than you. You're not out there with your little shovel.
I agree 100%. Of course there's a need for government. I say that in my article, in my golocalprov.com
That's basically
column.
what he's talking about.
He's just reiterating what I already said.
Yeah.
But we need people that are going to pay taxes and generate tax revenue. That's what I said.
Yeah.
And he's ignoring my point, and it's the
like
classic straw man argument. He's attributing an argument.
A sentence and is extrapolating from there something you didn't quite intend.
Exactly. He's attributing to me an argument I didn't make. And in fact, I made the exact opposite point. I said, of course we need government, but we need to also keep in mind that we need people paying for the government.
I think part of it, too, is that the phrase public service resonates very differently and very loudly for different people. Everyone has an idea of what it means.
That's very apparent, given this debate.
Well, but you see, where I draw the line is, if you're getting paid, it's not public service. I think you use the term public service to illustrate the point that people who are getting paid in the dreaded private sector share an equal billing with people who are getting paid in the public service who consider themselves public servants. Because what's missing in this concept of the social contract is the binary notion of it. The fact that on one side we have a social contract to pay taxes. Right? As a libertarian, that's tough for me to take, but I'll let
grant that for a second. Sure.
Duly noted. Please let the court stipulate. But let me also stipulate that in return, we expect some level of performance. As I read this weekend some of the pieces, about the pension dilemmas, the approaching resolution potentially of the court case, the familiar complaint came up that we had made a contract with people who work for the state and that we owed them these pensions, and to which I respond, we also had an implicit contract with you to provide a high level of services and goods to the people who live in this state. One can say that both sides violated this contract. So if there is in fact a social contract, isn't it incumbent upon the people who are on the recipient end of that to provide a level of goods and service to us of at least a mediocre nature?
Or
at least try.
I
wouldn't argue that our government workers don't do a good job. I mean, I think most of them are hardworking people who do a good job. I think when you look at Channel 12 and you see Tim White doing his sweeps, he catches the few bad apples. But I think on the whole, most people who do work for the government take their job seriously. I think far more do than don't. But I think that what's being lost in this conversation at Rhode Island Future is they're missing the point that the people that pay taxes are extremely important. It's not just it's your social contract, you have to do it. We need more of them, and we need to take care of them. We need to look out for them.
But let's put it in a historical perspective. There's some great internet memes that go across, and who would build the roads with roads that existed for thousands of years? Let's look at the Industrial Revolution. That took place almost despite government, as opposed to with the support of government. That happened here in Rhode Island because people of independent means decided to go back, and this is where we go back to the term risk capital. To me, capitalism is the mechanism by which people achieve their full potential. The reason being is that underlying part of human nature is the notion that people need to be rewarded for their work. In the absence of a reward for a higher or more exemplary level of work, you have mediocrity, and mediocrity is ultimately why societies crumble. If you look at government, the principal failure of government in this country, particularly in this state, is that government people are rewarded despite the poor level of their performance. Now, I'm not going to argue that there aren't a lot of nice people who work in Rhode Island state government. I've met a lot of them, all right? But ultimately, when you look at the aggregate result, when you look at the sum total of their work in the state on every single level, they are a consummate failure. Whether it be roads, education, infrastructure, go on and on and on every single level. This state is the ultimate example. This is Iceland in its socialistic purity, because we are an abject failure. While other states around us are thriving, particularly Massachusetts, not so much Connecticut, but particularly Massachusetts, we are literally, the ground is crumbling economically, socially, and fiscally behind our feet.
I don't think anyone can argue that Rhode Island is not a poorly run government. Of course it is. But I think that it's very hard to assign blame, at any particular level. I think there's plenty of blame to go around.
My guess would be that it's middle management and higher, not so much rank and file. If you're not being directed well, it's hard to do. If you're doing your job well, but you're being directed poorly, then the outcome is going to be poor.
Absolutely.
Regardless.
Of course.
Granted, but let's look at Central Falls as an example. Central Falls failed to a degree. Ultimately, there's a case of not being allowed to truly fail because pensions are still intact.
They've been cut in half.
That's not really intact by anybody's standard.
They should have failed. If we had invested, if they had managed like we're being asked to manage our private investments, all right, they would be bankrupt. They are only being propped up artificially by the tax dollars of people across the state. All right, so the result that they have anything at all is a miracle. But look at this. Look at the town. You can't tell me that people didn't stand idly by and watch the excesses and watch the corruption and turn a blind eye to it. It was too endemic. It was too ingrained in the social fabric of the town. The town in and of itself is a bureaucratic, crumbling mess that has been propped up for 3 generations by the rest of the state. And yet it's still not allowed to fail. It needs to fail. That's the purging that has to take place in Rhode Island in general.
And that points to the need for all of us as citizens to be paying attention and asking sharp questions and...
There's a high level of poverty in Central Falls that exists there that makes it very difficult to fund the government. You would have to agree.
Yeah.
I think Central Falls makes the case...
What's the solution there?
I think the solution is regionalization. Mm-hmm. We need a bigger a bigger city government than Central Falls, so that some of the more wealthier sections of what would be Central Falls, or whatever we're going to call it, can support some of the parts of Central Falls, or whatever the new city would be, that are less well off.
We need bigger school districts, certainly.
Of course, we need regionalization. But we have all these little fiefdoms and all these people who want to control their little principalities, or whatever you want to call them. They don't want to lose their power. That's what we're up against.
Right.
Which goes back to the original notion that none of these people involved at a moderate to high level can be construed as being public servants, because they're not. They exist to propagate their own fiefdoms. This week, millions of dollars was released by the federales to the state of Rhode Island for heating relief. Sounds great. Who doesn't want people to be warm in their homes? All right. At the same time, this was distributed to a half a dozen or so action committees across the state, and we explored a few months ago, when we first opened up the Coalition for Business, the kind of salaries that were being paid to people to effectively redistribute private funds that were expropriated, from the public, not in the form of a social contract, but in a sense on demand. I mean, I use the term social contract in this contract loosely because it's not a contract. A contract implies two people given written permission to each other to engage in a mutually beneficial relationship.
Exactly.
We are not in a contract with our government, and we serve our government.
And further, what happens when you make it too hard for the small business owners like Sam Corey to open and keep and maintain their business? What happens? They stop doing it. And then they look for jobs in the government, or they depend on social services. And then what happens? The economy plummets, and you end up with a place like Detroit, Central Falls, Rhode Island. So that's the point that I think is lost on some of these folks over at rifuture.org, who admittedly are good guys. They're nice, good people. I think they have the best of intentions, but they're missing the point. It can't just be all about government.
Because ultimately, if there isn't the engine to feed the beast of government, and it has become a beast in this state, the government ceases to exist. Why I ultimately hope for some level of financial collapse in Rhode Island is that the only way to purge, to give some sort of political and philosophical exorcism in this state, to remove the tumor, the cancer that is government here, right? The only way to do that is to pull the plug on the finances.
That's where we part company. We need reforms in Rhode Island. We don't need a meltdown. We don't need to go the way of Detroit or Central Falls and Mass. We need reform.
It really should be possible for us at some point to take a look at the madness and fix it.
But if you ultimately look at the...
You just find it entertaining to think of the government failing.
I do.
Let's admit.
He admits to it.
Absolutely. Yep. I always have.
In the same way I'm dying for Quebec to secede from Canada. Like I don't care whether it would be good for any of them. I just think it would be fun to have a new country up there.
Sure. The prospect of the ongoing theater, the spectacle,
exactly,
is astonishing.
We could go to 2 hours if that happened.
Right.
The problem is where the RI Futures and the well-meaning socialists of the world miss the connection is that when you start to tax and have this one-way social contract, inflicted to the point where the people who are able to provide risk capital fail to do so because there is no end game for them. It is human nature for them to walk away. When you press a socialist or someone who wants to engage in some sort of collaborative economic effort, and that socialist word's negative, I know, all right? When you a collectivist, let's use the term collectivist. When you press a collectivist for who's going to pay for it, there's always the they. They will pay for it. When you press who is they ultimately have some sort of hissy fit and walk away.
Which is why the people like Sam Corey and the other small business owners in Rhode Island need to be helped. They need to be looked after. They need to be protected. They don't need to be just like we shouldn't be snubbing our noses at them and saying, you're part of the social contract, pay the taxes and shut up.
Right.
It's not going to. If we continue to do that, we will fail. Rhode Island will fail.
Yeah,
we need to focus on small business in this state.
There needs to be some sane rate of tax that isn't crippling small businesses. Like the
regulations.
The property taxes now for commercial businesses are just outrageous.
Exactly. In my column at golocalprov.com, you can look at it. This guy's taxes went from $27,000 when he opened it in 2009, and they're $35,000 now in 2013. That's not sustainable, and that's not fair.
And that'll show you exactly how fair we are here on the Coalition, because we've mentioned Go Local Prov once, and we've mentioned RI Future 26 times. So if that isn't the ultimate in fairness, I don't know what is. We do have to take a quick break. We're about halfway through the program. CoalitionRadio.us is our website. P.O., what do you want to talk about after the break? I hear we might be doing some gambling tonight.
Yeah, we're going to do some gambling. Steel Cage Deathmatch. Russ and I. Russ has got a great piece coming up in Go Local. There you go, second time. GoLocalProv.com, where he's going to explore some of the economic incentives for crippling our economy with gambling.
Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On Twitter, Coalition_radio. And, of course, CoalitionRadio.us.
Heading out on the town tonight? Be sure to log on to ProvidenceNightOut.com and don't forget to check their cell phone app. That's ProvidenceNightOut.com.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Jones. You know, when I'm not here yakking about politics, I spin records. That's right, if you like good old-fashioned rock and roll radio the way God intended it to be, then tune in to The Tony Jones Show. The information's online at tonyjones.org. That's tonyjones.org.
I found a picture of you.
13 Folds is your definitive source for cannabis culture, with a print magazine, radio show, live events, and so much more. Check them out online at 13folds.com. That's the number 13, FOLDS.com.
Tuned in to the Coalition, CoalitionRadio.us, live radio at its finest. As I always mention, the website, the Twitter, the Facebook account. Our old pal, and I don't want to waste too much time talking about this idiot, however, our old pal, the Wild Side, who's on some rinky-dink other station, challenges me to go belly to belly on the Wild Side show. P.O., you can stay in the bunker. Christine, you're invited. You can come and co-host both shows. So I will be down there anytime. Just not too early in the morning. You know, these guys, they have no lives. And they want to get down to the station at like 6 in the morning. It's like, dude, that ain't happening. So, but I will be there anytime, buddy, and we will have I could probably get Narragansett Beer to sponsor that.
At 10 a.m.?
Let's have a Wild Side Clyde drinking game. Every time he says something stupid, we take a swig of Narragansett beer.
Aren't there laws against that?
I don't know if my tolerance can take that.
I will be there anytime, buddy, and thank you for tuning in, and make sure you tell your friends about the Coalition. Equal opportunity here on the program.
Well, Russ, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Tell us now. You've got a piece coming up this week. Now, what days? Give us a little background on Go Local. When can we see Rushmore's articles come out? Give us
you should go to Go Local every single day because they always have great articles, very interesting slideshows, very interesting opinion pieces, and mine is just one of many. My column runs every Monday, so you can find it on Monday, or you can go back and find it basically any day of the week. But this Monday coming up, I've got a piece coming out just to tease it. And I address the issue of gambling. I saw where Massachusetts has a initiative going. Well, the residents of Massachusetts have undertaken an initiative because, over in Massachusetts, they actually have voter initiative. Rhode Island, we're not allowed that.
Right.
But in Massachusetts, they've gathered 90,000 signatures to repeal their casino law, which would effectively be the best thing that could ever happen to Rhode Island. It would put off the meltdown that you're looking for, because we would be able to keep our gaming revenue if they were to repeal these casinos and not actually build them. So my argument is Rhode Islanders should be all in favor of that, repeal your casino law, but at the same time, let's get innovative. Either you're in the business of casino gaming, or in gambling, or you're not in the business. Go big or go home. So what I suggest we do is we legalize sports betting in Rhode Island. It would be a boon to tourism. People would come here, they'd spend time here, they'd use the restaurants, they'd bet on sports, we'd get tax revenue from it. I also suggest that we open up poker rooms, maybe 4 or 5 of them throughout the state. Bid on the licenses. That would bring in tax revenue, and then we could tax the games. Poker is a huge trend. It's going up. I know tons of people that drive to Foxwoods to play poker. Some go to Atlantic City. If we could keep those people here and capture their tax dollars, it would be great for the Rhode Island government, great for the economy. And lastly, you mentioned earlier that I'm a man who's been known to take part in the sport of kings, which to those who aren't familiar is horse racing. This is true. I've been known to place a few wagers on the ponies from time to time. My last recommendation, and this is probably kind of far out, but not too far out, because there was a group led by Lincoln Chafee several years ago, governor, then he was just a citizen, I suppose, that was looking at putting a horse track in Rhode Island again. Well, I realized that Building 19 is going out of business. Mm-hmm. Here's an opportunity to reopen Narragansett Park in Pawtucket. Why not do that? So those are my 3 suggestions, and I'm sure you love them, P.O. I'm sure they think those are great ideas.
Well, now, if you haven't met Russ in person, the only thing missing, what did we describe the other day, was the fedora with the
press on the top. Sure.
Yeah. Because
let's talk. Yeah.
Because if there was truly a creation of the 50s, all right, living here in the new millennium with an interesting mix of both, it would be Russ Moore. So, if
I'm not sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but
I don't think any of us, including P.O., are sure if that's a compliment or not.
I don't. Yeah, as it may.
I have this. Do you play Sinatra in the car on the way home?
Of course.
Okay, there you go. That's all I needed.
Big Sinatra fan. Perry Cuomo, Tony. I've seen Tony Bennett multiple times in concert.
He's terrific.
Isn't he?
Here's a guy living
Engelbert Humperdinck. I've seen.
Here's a guy living the high life. Someday when I grow up, I want to be just like you.
Thank you, P.O. Hang with me. I'll show you the way. Stick with me.
Where do I begin? First of all, in the spirit of the holidays, we had a great debate about the state's name just a few years ago. So we can take on 2 social issues at once. Number one, we can get rid of the whole plantation issue. And I say that with a degree of seriousness and respect for those people. All right. And number 2, we can actually do some real marketing and really give an identification to the state that the greater culture will respond. Now, if you've ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life, you'll understand that when Jimmy Stewart's character goes into his dream sequence, he goes back to his hometown and it's been renamed Pottersville. And there are honky-tonks and there are big boat limos driving down the street with swell-looking dames and mobsters. One could argue that Providence really isn't far from that sort of mythological ideal. So
this would push us along down that path.
This would push us pretty much. We have bar fights in the middle of Main Street at this point.
Yay!
What the heck? So if this Christmas, when you're watching It's a Wonderful Life, all right, I want you to identify with the character Pottersville and that crusty old banker. That'll be that could have been Don Carcieri.
Right.
So, but here's the problem. You actually brought the issue right up to a head. What was your term? It was either play or go home?
Go big or go home.
Go big or
Either
go
you're
home.
in the business or you're not in the business.
All right.
I'm glad you mentioned Governor Carcieri, because I mentioned in my column he always had an asinine position on gambling. It was always, I'll allow the gambling that we have, but we're not going to add anything else. Well, the gambling that we had was also the most the most harmful, nefarious form.
Yeah,
sure, the most addictive, the least interactive, the least.
It's the bottom feeding one.
Sure,
it's the people with no money and no skill.
Exactly.
Basically, you're flushing their money down a toilet.
Whereas the form of gaming I'm advocating would actually, they're interactive, they're fun. You can hang with your buddies.
I'm not a fan of the term gaming. It's gambling.
Okay.
Let's just call it gambling.
Okay, that's fair.
And
Gaming is the industry term, the euphemism that they're trying to use to sneak things in. It was video gaming when they pushed the video slots through.
That's right.
And for the vast repository of people,
As an advocate of gambling, that's why I think I've been calling it gaming.
Just call it gambling. Call
Sure.
it gambling.
All right.
I would rather see people engaging in gambling games of skill than flushing money down the video slot machines.
And that's my argument. Horse racing, poker, sports betting is at least social. You can watch it with your buddies.
Yeah.
What say you, Pio?
Well,
I'm waiting for the.
opposed to all
I'm waiting to be beaten down here.
Pio's
first of
opposed
all-
for two reasons.
How does a libertarian like yourself oppose gaming? Gambling, excuse me. I'm sorry.
I don't oppose it at all. I don't oppose it at all. I just don't believe the government should have any role in it whatsoever. My first remark would be, of course, is that this would be job preservation for everybody in the state whose middle name is the. All right. So in that respect, you are achieving. There's a social good there. I'll give you that.
But those people already have their jobs.
No, it's been troubling years. Growing up Gotti just ain't like it used to be. or what is it? One wag put it. Growing up Mollis.
Oh boy.
It's just not the same anymore. My argument would be it's time to go home. I firmly believe that one of the reasons, and a significant reason, maybe not the only reason, but a significant reason the state is in the economic desperate times it is because a significant percentage of the gross domestic product of the state of Rhode Island that goes towards essentially dead-end gambling. This is money that could be spent on local restaurants, local contractors, education. Money's not taken by the tax people, but money spent by individuals on their own personal lives. Now you say, okay, as a libertarian, why are you opposed to that? Well, I'm opposed to the government using my taxpayer dollars to fund the marketing to essentially publicly and somewhat legally steal money from the disadvantaged. Because ultimately, these games of chance are rigged in favor of the house. Ultimately,
of course they are.
If you pay for a certain amount of time, the house wins. And in this case, the house
Those
is
are in table games, you're right, but in some of these pari-mutuel games like horse racing and poker, the house just takes a cut off the top. And if you're that percentage better than your adversaries, it's not rigged against you.
Well, and if a private enterprise comes along and wants to do that, God bless America. I have no qualms about that whatsoever. This state, as has been said by smarter people than I, does not suffer from a revenue problem. It suffers from an expense problem. And given the philosophy of the people who run it, all right, the more money that the state gives up in to the state's coffers from viable purposes, and I don't care what they are. You can spend, as a libertarian, you can spend your money on whatever you want, whatever it is that makes you happy. But the state using tax dollars to promote, essentially this great transfer of money away from people, all right, in order to fund this bureaucratic beast, it's just an abomination to me. There is ultimately nothing to be gained because the state will not put that money into education like it was supposed to with the lottery. The state will not put the money into infrastructure like it was supposed to with the gasoline tax. The state will not put the money into any one of a set of selected services that were supposed to be dedicated flows of income because they will simply lie and change the rules later. That's what they do. When you ultimately are governed by a bunch of pathological miscreants, all right, there is no hope, there is no future. Whatever you give them will be sucked away into the vast black hole of Rhode Island government. Use the tumor analogy that I employed earlier. I just see no path to prosperity in it, when at the same time, if a fraction of this money has been spent on local businesses, local enterprises, local anything, all right, that's money. Get back to the economics argument. The cyclical nature of money as it flows through the economy is greatly enhanced when it goes through private hands into other private hands. That's been statistically proven in every part of the world but the state. And since the state insists on engaging in every sort of academic activity without any level of self-introspection, without any level of analysis, while at the same time requiring an environmental impact statement if you want to put a freaking koi pond in your background, is astonishing to me. So we continually inflict these masses of spending and taxes and fees and bureaucracy on a public without any consideration at all what to do. So I would say, first off, before we do anything else, let's do an economic environmental impact statement, if you will, on the level of gambling that already exists and try to prove once and for all whether it's actually helping or hurting us, because my contention is it's hurting us.
It would almost have to be completely deregulated for it to work. There would have to be a one-time fee, and you pay your percentage on your winnings. I think there would also have to be an at-home component, so people that want to do poker online and things of that nature could be huge. Actually, nationwide, it could be huge if that was deregulated. But and theologically, I'm all for gambling, knock yourself out. But like you said, Pat, PL, as far as it, see, we're not the same person. As far as it being a revenue stream, it's been studied that as far as just simple resorts, these things do have shelf life. So we're seeing that with Foxwoods right now. So you would have to have the at-home, the off-track. But on the other side of that, if you've ever been into one of these off-track betting places, they are just the most depressing things on the face of the planet. Just like some old lady on oxygen, they're down to her last $20.
Yeah, I'd actually like to see us close down the ones that suck money from the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum and open more high-stakes things. Like, why not have James Bond-esque Baccarat games?
Because James Bond is never coming to Rhode Island.
But he would.
Hey, Donnie and Marie are coming to Rhode Island.
If you had a glamorous casino at one of the mansions in Newport, with Baccarat, I think people would show up.
If you wanted to put another opprobrium on this state, it would be Rhode Island, the D-list state. Okay, we are by definition what we are. A very wise person that I worked with for a number of years and worked in the liquor business, and he said to me, he got a great Blackstone Valley accent. I wish I could do it justice. He go, you yuppies are all alike. In my world, there's 3 types of wine. You got your red, you got your white, your pink. All right? this state is a Miller beer and Chablis state. And no matter what you yuppies wanted to, and you know what? After living here for 25 years, he's right, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I don't want to sound entirely true. There are people there are people who spend ridiculous amounts of money to live in Little Compton for the summer. There are people who spend
I agree with that.
amounts of money
Absolutely.
to spend time in Newport. We have the potential to milk money out of tourists.
That's right.
If we would stop milking money out of our own lower income residents.
There's some pretty heavy hitters in my neck of the woods. They would love something
down
like
in
that.
East. Yeah. If your worldview is Rhode Island's doomed to fail, we can never reform it, it can never get better, then I can understand where you're coming from. But if you have, at some point, you have to have some level of optimism about your state to think that we can reform the government, that we can get new streams of revenue, that we can make this place better.
PO derives a certain amount of satisfaction from assuming that there's no change possible.
Yeah, it's like abandon all hope.
To quote the immortal, I mean, you go through life and you have certain philosophers in life. Mine, yes, Jesus Christ is important in my life. Yes, Bugs Bunny is. But when it comes to Jack Nicholson, as he put it, this town needs an enema. And the only way this town will see... I am an Ayn Randian. I truly believe that Rhode Island, on a philosophical and moral level, when it comes to its municipal finances, how it runs its government, is a crack whore. All right? Is nothing less than that. And ultimately, for whether it be any one of the number of addictions that you face in life, we all realize that for most people to overcome them, they have to sink to rock bottom first. And Rhode Island isn't quite there yet. On a number of levels, they are. All right? But ultimately... as this state continues to swing more in favor of the status quo with every election, you just had the spectacle this week of the fallen angel, the mayor of Providence, suggesting that there should be universal pre-K. Now, of course, there should be universal pre-K. On that whole, how are we going to pay for it, Sparky? All right? That didn't quite seem to come up. So when you have these politicians who are willing to engage in politics at the level of, we're going to give you better lunches at the high school cafeteria and we're going to eliminate homework without any sort of adult consequences to it, this is what you get. And that's why Rhode Island must fail.
That's depressing.
I think we need people... citizens, voters, to be paying more attention and waking up.
They're not going to. I mean, for the people who listen to this show, and you're absolutely, there's a subcurrent of people in this state who are innately on a genetic level plugged in. They go to blogs, our future. They listen to shows like us. They listen to some of the smarter talking head shows. They read the newspapers. They do all of this.
They go to golocalprov.com.
They go to golocalprov.com. They read Russ Moore's They do all of this. And ultimately, just on a sheer numbers basis, they are so overwhelmed by the amount of people in this state living off the teat whose existence revolves around either working for, working by, employed by the state of Rhode Island, that there is simply no hope. It's hate to be like that, but I proved there has been a significant electoral movement at any level in the last 10 years to prove that Rhode Islanders as a group are coming together and saying, enough, let's throw off the shackles and let's move forward.
Well,
single one.
The issue is some of the stations like WPRO, things of that nature, they are, unfortunately, the people who go in there, unlike alternative media, are preaching to the choir. So if they go to PRO with a movement, with a new candidate, with a possible new scheme, new thing, the people that listen to the traditional media outlets are spoken for. They are Republicans and they're listening because they want to get preached to, or they are Democrats and they're listening because they want to get riled up. It's when you look to alternative media where you see varying streams of ideas, that's where someone could come in with a legitimate idea, whatever it may be, and get new voters, get people to donate, get people interested. If everybody is going to keep preaching to the choir, we will see P.O.'s dream.
Right. We need less preaching to the choir or preaching to the damned, as the case may be. And we also need people, including ourselves, to show up at meetings, go to public meetings.
And we need leaders.
Go to your PTA meeting, go to your city council meeting, and
absolutely
press some buttons.
And we need leaders with courage, and we need leaders with fresh ideas or innovative ideas. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed and become better unless we start doing things differently. We can't do the same things we've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years or more and expect to get different results.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise, we will end up like Detroit, or we will end up like Central Falls on a mass scale. And that's why we need innovation. We need new ideas. It just can't be the same thing.
We need more citizens who care about things and who have better motivations to run for small offices.
And even when you talk about Central Falls, the past election a few weeks ago, after all they went through, after having every citizen stripped of their rights, the mayor ran unopposed. A large amount of the town council people, mostly females, got in office. They're going to do some change, but they also ran unopposed. After all that, still, nobody cared. And I understand in a situation like that, people are just trying to survive. They're just trying to survive. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to make their rent. But in 2013, in America, in a situation like that, people still ran unopposed.
Well, this is ultimately the I know a guy state. And in the I know a guy state, it's much more interesting to be friends with the people in power because of the perceived personal gain than it is to challenge people in power. And as long as that attitude persists, there is no hope. Mm-hmm. I just don't see as much as highly motivated as the people in this room are, and some of our listeners. And by the way, just as an aside, Tony, maybe we just throw in a pitch for next week's guest, because if you want to talk about someone who's highly motivated, altruistic, and trying to do the things for the right reason,
and has been for many years.
We've got Greg Garrett coming in, who from the Rhode Island Green Party, and just about every legitimate social cause you could think of.
So you guys will agree on a lot, huh?
You'll agree on some things, not others.
We
the same way you and I do.
Yeah, we agree on where we want to be. It's just a question of how to get there.
Right. He probably doesn't want Rhode Island to fail.
Well, you want it to fail in order to succeed.
Exactly.
Well, you also want it to fail so you can say, I told you so.
Yeah, true.
Let's face it.
No, that's absolutely accurate. No, there's always an element of, when you're dealing with the intellectual maturity of me, there's always a nanny feature.
Right.
But
we don't want to deprive you of all your fun.
But no, if you I don't want to be a spoiler, a plot spoiler here, but if you go to the end of Ayn Rand's major work, Atlas Shrugged, I want to be the guy in that plane flying over Providence as the last light goes out. And then at that point in time, there will be some, because then good people, probably driven by personal motivations, all right, will clear up the wreckage and move forward. Or at least you have the opportunity for that. Because at that point in time, finally in the eyes of the great uncaring, all right, in the eyes of the great uncaring, they will see what a miserable failure, hopefully, I could be wrong, what a miserable failure the wretches that inhabit Halitosis Hall have been, and just how much personal damage they've done to all of our lives. That knowing the guy isn't quite the same as having benefited from the guy. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just and ultimately, until it becomes an issue of personal, on a highly personal level, self-interest, no one's interested in changing. I mean, look at the only tax reform that took place in this last General Assembly election was by a guy named John Malik. All right, and if there was ever a more narcissistic, self-absorbed person in elected politics that I've ever seen, it's him. He rolled back the taxes. He was on hooked up with the people who were the 0% sales tax and essentially advocated for lowering the sales tax on liquor. Why? Because he owns a liquor store in Warren, Rhode Island. And if you ever listen to this individual, all right, you will notice that his entire interest, his entire worldview revolves completely around the prospects for him succeeding in that liquor store. The fact that coincidentally other people may have benefited was purely in its most extreme form an accident. The fact that there might have been some social good that came out of some obscure piece of legislation out of that hellhole up there was just completely. What are the odds? All right?
How can you be so sure of his motivations?
I've spoken to the guy.
What he told you? He said, "This is all about me, baby." Is that?
I've listened to this guy opine on this.
He owns a liquor store, and he wanted the sales tax dropped.
But at the same
QED.
But at the same time, don't you think that our legislators should be making rules about things they know? I mean, would you want him advocating for industries he knows nothing about?
Pat, we need to get out there and make sure we legislate the drop of the price in big and tall men's clothing.
Absolutely. Bring Hajar's. If you've ever been to Hajar's up in Boston, bring those boys to Rhode Island. That's what EDC should be working on.
I want to have Junior Mints declared a staple food so that it's no longer under subject to sales tax.
Anything over a 3X is free from now on, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we are looking forward to having Greg on. We're going to give him the benefit of the full coalition experience, But and again, we've had
sounds like a double entendre.
But we've had everybody from Ray Rickman to Mike Stenhouse on this show, and I think they've enjoyed their experience here. And they've been given it a chance to open up the airwaves and just hold forth on what their opinions are.
We don't blow smoke. This really is an open door.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to listening to it next week, just as I do every week.
Yeah. So as if you could get the Hiltons or the Marriott people, all right, in here to do a resort, and you could perform whatever you need to do in terms of zoning issues, help him out maybe with some infrastructure. Heck, we got that. What is it? That Superman building? Yeah, that's a ticket. If you're talking about doing something like that, where they come in and the state gathers its normal tax, and the state only manages it from a legal perspective to make sure there's no criminality. If you're talking about something like that, of course, we should. If that's what could happen down at Quonset Point, Joe Trillo tried to advance some legislation a couple of years ago about Quonset Point. But it always comes back to the same thing. If you look at the Superman building, what can you guys do for me? Can we privatize privatize success and socialize the risk? And that's every one of these guys walking into the state, because we have, as a state, we've got a giant mark on it.
Look, I'm just sitting back.
Every business tries to do that. Every industry tries to do that. And in too many cases, they've been successful.
And by the way, if Paris Hilton wants to come here in the studio and talk to me personally about that idea, I'd be happy.
You're all for it?
I'd be
all right.
happy to get that going.
Just leave those dogs home.
When I wrote this column, I was just trying to think of things where there's a market and that we could fulfill it. I know that people want to bet legally on sports. We could capture that market. We could provide that niche. I know that people want to play poker. We are in a position to provide that. Why not just look at the market, see what's needed, and do it? It's very simple for me.
Fair enough.
Well, why stop there? I think we should build a huge racetrack around the state.
I like that.
We do. We have it's called I-95.
Excellent.
No, it needs to be closed.
But interestingly
Maybe we
enough,
could fill in the potholes.
Like a big Grand Prix.
But they're trying to redefine Federal Hill for the 25th time. They want to close the hookah bars. They want to do this. They want to do that. It's this constant meddling.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, exactly. That's what we got to get away from.
Sure.
Create the opportunity, create the zoning, and let businesses do their thing.
Right.
And cycling it back to the very beginning of this show, if you allow people who are willing to put their own risk capital at stake for the purpose of private gain, ultimately the social good that will come of it will be increased employment, increase revenues, and at that point in time, you can perhaps use government for some type of social good.
Stop inhibiting small business. Don't do anything for them. Just get out of the way. That's what we need the government to do. Get out of the way.
And when you talk about leadership, we talk about speaking up. It is in defense of everybody who doesn't care. It's tough to stick your neck out there. You almost have to be sick like us where you enjoy that kind of thing. Right? We joked with Mr. Caprio last week that He was for separation of powers.
Great show,
and
by the way.
He needed a seeing eye dog to get to his office because he was for separation of powers. It's
But there's a perfect example of someone who fought for something and ultimately we're better off because of it. So it's not completely hopeless. We do have leaders in the state. We just need to support them.
We're going to have to tax BDSM if we want any more leadership. Unfortunately, we do have to get out of here. Great show, though, guys.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in.
Our
See you
door
again
is,
in a
of
few
course,
weeks.
always open. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On Twitter, Coalition_radio, of course, CoalitionRadio.us, and proud to announce once again this hour that you can now find the Coalition on iTunes. Until next time.